So Disney have released a brand new Muppets thing on Disney Plus, and it's probably the best thing that we've gotten from them in just years. This is a documentary looking at the life of Jim Henson, who made the Muppets. And I've covered him and his work quite extensively and continue to do so because he just created so much stuff, you know. He had so many ideas, and that's why the documentary is called Idea Man, which is also a reference to a short film, of course, featuring the iconic Limbo face.
You know, I'm an idea man.
So, with this documentary, I can't really say enough good things about it. It's directed by the famed director Ron Howard. From the release of the trailer, you knew it was going to be good, and there was this dramatic, orchestrated rendition of Rainbow Connection, and that worked so well. And of course, all of the things that he created are now owned by different people. So Disney have the Muppets, Sesame Workshop has the Sesame Street stuff, and then the Jim Henson Company is also its own thing. So when you think about it, it's pretty impressive that this thing got made because it covers all of Henson's work. I almost expected like a kind of bias to the Muppets because that's what Disney owns, but it absolutely isn't. And the overall kind of takeaway from it is that like this is the Muppets. Compared to the contemporary stuff that we have, just watching this documentary telling the story of Jim Henson and the Muppet Show and everything, like this is more entertaining. It feels right. But yeah, it starts off with the return of Nobody. For the first time in God knows how many years, the abstract, weird, scary puppet thing. But it's such a good introduction to the whole thing. And we have all the weird, creepy sound effects, but then instead we'll have all of these images from Jim's life flashing on the screen. It's all really well made, and yeah, you can tell there is a budget behind it. There's not just flashy graphics for no reason. They do a lot of cool things with the interviews, the text and the footage that you wouldn't see in your standard documentary on YouTube, for example. Now, ironically, I've recently been working on another documentary based around Henson, focusing on one aspect of his work. And when doing that, I try to do as much research as possible and find all of this obscure information. But the difference with this is that you've got access to these people who knew Jim, so there is footage of stuff that I've never seen before, especially some of the really early stuff, and for the age of these clips, they look really good. I believe it mentioned in the credits that they've been newly restored. Like I once did a video trying to improve the audio of an original Jim Henson commercial by upscaling it with AI, which I kind of regret, to be honest, because it's not genuine. In this documentary, they have like cleaned the hell out of this audio and the visuals. Kind of a clearer look into his early life. But yeah, the interview setup that we've got is based off The Cube, which was a short film that Henson did. Something about an alternate universe where you're in this kind of cube and all the cubes show these like pictures and stuff. So they use this obscure thing really well. And as the interviewees are talking, you've got these cubes in the background changing to different photos and stuff. It's stuff like that that makes us think like Jim would have loved to have seen this, to know that these weird random short films and stuff were now forming part of this massive documentary that's so kind of mainstream, you know. But I really feel you get a sense of who Jim is watching the whole thing. There are some details like the death of his older brother when he was younger that you don't really hear about a lot, and it's nice to hear how much that kind of pushed him early on. And it was fascinating to hear that when he was younger, puppetry wasn't really an interest, it was just as a way to get into TV. Nobody was doing puppetry, so that seemed like a way in. I think what kind of shines through the most is just the purity of Henson's desire to entertain people. That was kind of his goal. He wanted to help people by making them laugh or educating kids or both. It's mentioned that when he did commercials, he wasn't particularly happy. Despite commercials paying really well, he was doing something that he didn't particularly want to do because it's just selling a product. So they mention that he tried to have as much fun with it as he could, which is how you got the famous Wilkins coffee ads and stuff. Even something like an advert He just couldn't stand the thought of it being a bland corporate thing, and decades later people are still watching that stuff on YouTube and it is still good comedy. That to me proves that his kind of work ethic was right. He accomplished so much when they did Sesame Street, but then it was, instead of expanding Sesame Street and doing more kids shows as a normal businessman would, he wanted to do something completely different. And that's how you ended up with him pitching the Muppet Show Sex and Violence, which didn't go down well with anyone, until eventually the Muppet Show was made and things just got bigger and bigger, until after 5 years Jim cancelled it because he wanted to do other things now. This is why the title of Idea Man I think is so appropriate, and that's what sticks out about Jim really prominently in this, is that he really was all just for entertainment and what he felt like he needed to do, which is where the kind of realistic animatronics come into it. So you've got the Dark Crystal and Labyrinth films, which Jim put so much energy into them, and they are technologically really impressive, but the audience reaction to it was just pretty terrible. It's such a positive story up until that point. You've got this growing success of the Muppets and everything, and it just keeps going. But because Jim wanted to do something so radically different, that didn't work out, and you end up with, later on in his life, put all this energy into these films and people didn't like them. It's a genuinely upsetting part of the documentary because doesn't feel right. And then it briefly covers stuff like Fraggle Rock, but never quite did reach the heights of the original Muppet Show and Sesame Street again. But yeah, Jim was a complete workaholic, and that is really apparent throughout this. It mentions that like a couple days would go by where he hadn't slept. The amount of work that he did in like 50 odd years, it was just kind of remarkable. He never stopped. There's a Doctor Who quote that says some people live more in 30 years than others do in 80. And I think that's incredibly true of Jim. But with this being a Disney documentary, that comes with a lot of concerns these days. But I'm pleased to say it wasn't too skewed or anything. Ron Howard seemed to have a lot of control. It was nice to see Steve Whitmire included in all of these original puppeteers, and to be honest, with it being a Disney thing and considering what went down recently, I kind of expected Steve to be edited out or something. But no, not only does he feature in some of the footage, but is credited at the end with a special thanks from the producers. Having Steve Whitmire credited on a new Muppets thing in 2024 isn't something that I had on my bingo card, because it is sad. You know, in the documentary it doesn't touch upon the aftermath of Jim's death. It feels kind of wrong, you know, but Frank Oz mentions at one point how Jim had this tight group of performers, each one he really trusted, and they were there for a reason. His words kind of form the backbone of the documentary. I think they keep referring to his interview a lot. Frank Oz is absolutely iconic, but he hasn't had a lot of good things to say about Disney. There's been interviews where he cited them as, you know, contributing to Jim's death because the Disney deal was such a strain on him. He's also said that he just doesn't like the modern Muppets. So bearing all that in mind, it's surprising to have him featured, but it is especially just sad at the end because you go through all of these amazing things that Jim did, and then started off the Disney deal so he could take a step back from the Muppets and do these other things that he wanted to do, and then that was when he died. I mean, whenever you kind of drop that bombshell surrounding something as kind of innocent as the Muppets, I think when I did the original Kermit voice video, that probably did well because of how hard-hitting that is, and it's not made up, it's not fabricated, that is just what happened. They make a point of Jim wanting to use all the time that he had to do as much as possible, and they keep intercutting this with, you know, an image of a clock ticking, and at the end they show the clock stop, and it's bittersweet. That's what it ends on. This feeling of he did so much and we've got loads to be thankful for, but what more could he have done? So upon the end of the documentary, we revisit this kind of cube style again, and we get text at the end that tells you what became of Henson's creations. The main takeaway that I got from this is that this is the Muppets. When people say that they are fans of Jim Henson and the Muppets, this kind of shows you why. And in comparison, if you look at the Muppets collection on Disney Plus, I don't even think this is part of it, but you've got like the few CGI animated Muppet Babies cartoons, a few of the old films, the Muppet Show and the new films. And that is like but a fraction of Jim's work. There is a stupid amount of content that isn't on Disney Plus that they could show, but in the documentary they use this vast array of clips from loads of obscure shows. Obviously his properties are kind of separated, they don't own everything, but the Muppets alone have like so many appearances, and that kind of builds this whole experience that Jim created with his work. But as it stands, I would definitely recommend this documentary. I think it's a great story for anyone, who doesn't know the Muppets, but if you're a fan of Henson, this is hands down the best thing Disney's done with the Muppets in years. So yeah, let us know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you next time.